Welcome to the presentation of Chapter 6, also titled The Abyss Gazes Also, in Watchmen by Alan Moore. So why is the title named The Abyss Gazes Also? This title is in reference to the quote on the very last panel of the chapter by the philosopher Nietzsche. It reads, "Battle not with monsters, lest ye become a monster. And if you gaze into the abyss gazes also into you." The monster symbolizes Rorschach, and the abyss represents the psychological change that Dr. Long endures while speaking with Walter. In panel 5 on page 1, another connection with the chapter title can be made with how Dr. Long says he could stare at him for hours, and the only exception being that he stares back, also referring to the abyss that is Walter's life and how it will affect him psychologically. So this chapter is basically the introduction of Rorschach's, aka Walter's, backstory, and it provides us, the reader, with context and character development into Walter's life. We get perspective into Rorschach's childhood through his therapy sessions with Dr. Malcolm Long. However, these therapy sessions aren't like normal sessions. While Walter acts like he's improving throughout the chapter, it is in reality only a guise, and we, the reader, get flashbacks throughout Walter's life, which give us context into the person he really is. One of the main symbols in the chapter is Rorschach's mask. His mask is made up of a white fabric with black ink which constantly changes. When we see the multiple images of his mask transforming into different shapes, it represents the Rorschach test. This test is where different combinations of dots of ink are used to see a person's interpretation. Depending on their interpretation, you can make an educated guess as to what their personality traits and emotional functioning are like. They're often used to determine mental illnesses or stability in both court cases and parole hearings, hence why we see it being administered to Walter in prison. Rorschach's mask meaning is also brought up on page 26 in the middle panels. He mentions his view on the world, which are dark and bleak, and references the mask when he talks about existence being random on panel 4, and free to scrawl own design on this morally blank world on panel 6. So his mask basically shows his way of demonstrating good and justice to a world that is so morally devout that it's like his mask having no pattern and free from morals. Similar to the idea of Rorschach's mask changing is the idea of metamorphosis throughout the chapter. The evolution of Rorschach through the repetition of images like the butterfly on the Rorschach test and the repetition of flashbacks throughout the chapter correlate to the development of both Walter and Dr. Long throughout the chapter. Dr. Long's transformation into Rorschach is a gradual progression through the chapter, through both their sessions and Dr. Long pondering about Walter's life. It makes me think of the scene from the movie Watchmen during the prison fight where Rorschach says, "I'm not locked in here with you, but you're locked in here with me," and how Dr. Long thinks he's Rorschach's therapist, but in reality it is Rorschach who's almost psychologically altering him. Page 27 and 28 really demonstrate the progression of Dr. Long throughout the chapter. During the end of page 27, Dr. Long is in a conversation with house guests where we see his transformation into a Rorschach-like figure when he turns them unappeased, telling them the harsh reality of the girl that got kidnapped. Along with the second to the sixth panel on the last page, page 28, which shows Dr. Long not only being treated like Rorschach by his wife, but also realizing the meaning behind his mask in his life through the looking at the picture of the ink dots, thus completing his transformation. Similar to Dr. Long's transformation, we also see Walter transform into his Rorschach persona. It starts with his flashback starting on page 18, which demonstrates the event that turns him into Rorschach. An allusion in this flashback is Rorschach walking out of the burning house, page 25, panel 7. The graphic correlates to Walter turning into a phoenix of sorts with the fire behind him. It correlates to the mythology of a phoenix because, like a phoenix, Rorschach is born out of this blood and fire of his murder, and he continues to develop more and more of this attitude. Another key symbol in the chapter is Walter's relationship with his mom. It is a symbol for a sense of justice for the fact that he was checking on his mom during her screams on page 3. The dialogue given by Rorschach on page 4, panel 5 is also good evidence for this because of how he tries to defend his actions. His mom kind of symbolizes the world's view of Walter and Rorschach as a whole. through her beatings and constant degradation of Walter, which we see later by many different characters and people throughout the novel. Another key idea in the chapter is the question of whether Rorschach is a nihilist or not. So nihilism is the philosophy that pretty much describes life as meaningless, and a person who is a nihilist is someone who is free from morals or principles. It is the opposite from someone who is an objectivist, who would be described as a hero who only believes in morals and happiness, similar to the way Superman is often portrayed. In this chapter, since we get to know so much about Rorschach, I think it is fair to determine that he's a nihilist. The way he answers the Rorschach test with the ink blots lets the reader have some insight into how he views life. He views it as pointless, and he can't tell right from wrong based on his answers. Also, based on the flashbacks, we can tell that Rorschach's childhood and his murders, like that of the 6-year-old murderer, show that he is devoid of all morals and principles by how he implements justice. Also, there is no direct allusion with Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, but I just want to point out how both Rorschach and the Joker could be classified as similar by them both having nihilistic traits. Both are in a way free from moral principles and perceive the world in a similar dark light. This transitions into the next major symbol of the chapter, the difference between good and evil. Arguments for Rorschach being evil could cite the multiple flashbacks of the murders in the chapter. Him calling the other heroes soft, page 14, panel 8, and page 15, panel 4, his pointing out of similarities to who some could consider evil in his own way, the comedian. Also, the scenes of violence in the prison as well as in his bully flashback could prove as evidence as well. But there is also an argument to be made that Rorschach is good too. From his sessions with Dr. Long, we get to know the thought process and personality of Walter, who believes in justice and will go as far as to breaking typical moral code to serve it. Also, his multiple instances of standing up and seeking vengeance for people in the chapter, like we see him try to protect his mom in the beginning, himself from bullies, and him killing the murderer of a 6-year-old girl. At first glance, the psychiatric notes at the end of the chapter don't seem like much, but they give the reader quite a bit of additional backstory into Walter's life, and Moore throws in a few additional allusions as well. In the letter titled My Parents, we see Walter's obsession with President Truman that he got from the stories of his dad. He, like his father, agreed with his involvement in the dropping of the atom bomb at the end of World War II, which sacrificed lives for the betterment of society, kind of like Walter's persona Rorschach. Although what is weird is that Ozymandias' plan is kind of like Truman dropping the atom bomb, which begs the question of why Rorschach didn't agree with his plan. It's also interesting how Moore and Gibbons use the name Charlton Home at the top of the letter, which could have symbolized the DC Charlton superheroes, and how originally it was thought that those were the heroes that Moore and Gibbons were going to use for the book.